Did you know that all experiences in your life are for you? Welcome to Soul Musings, exploring and embracing higher perspectives with me, Dr. Connie. Discover how every experience is an opportunity for spiritual expansion when we observe and use them from the higher perspective of our soul. Explore how we can create more alignment in our lives by focusing on the essence of the experience we want, rather than the form. Learn about ways of living and working together that can build a more harmonious and cooperative world. In each episode, we share awarenesses and tools that you can use in your own soul's journey to create more love, peace, and joy. Soul Musings starts now. So hello, everyone, and welcome to Soul Musings, exploring and embracing higher perspectives. And we're going to start, as always, with just a quick centering process. So take in a deep breath, and you might want to put your hand on your heart. And now just see a beautiful stream of light coming from the highest realms down through the top of your head, all the way through your body and all levels of consciousness, pushing away anything of a negative nature, anything you no longer need. And as you breathe in again, just feel all those places that have been cleared with light and love and peace and joy. And just experience the comfort of that as you slowly come back present here. So today we have a really fun show, I think, and I've invited my colleague Jack Reed, who's the founder of Community Planet Foundation, the author of The Next Evolution, a blueprint for transforming the planet. On February 13th, we did a show with Dr. Pat where we talked about Community Planet, the consensus decision-making process that Jack and I co-created and co-facilitate for Community Planet. And I've asked him to join us today because on this show, we're going to be talking about some cooperative communication skills that we have found really help not only in the process of consensus decision-making, but in any interaction that you want more cooperation or collaboration. What we found is not only what is said, but how it's said can engender either resistance or cooperation in discussions. And in this episode, we're going to look at some of the communication skills that we have found to be valuable. And these same communication skills can be used even in one-to-one situations. They're just designed to maximize the abilities to hear and understand what is being said, leading to greater harmony. How does this relate to a higher perspective? Though the way I see it, and I think Jack agrees, higher perspective, we're one and we're connected, both as a family of man and in the awareness of our divinity, the oneness that we are as divine beings. So that anything that fosters separation or againstness gets in the way of that experience of that oneness and that spiritual sense of who we are. Not only with others, but also with ourselves. So communicating for cooperation seeks to use language that helps connect and engage and cooperate both with self and others. Jack, do you want to comment on that?
Communication for cooperation is consistent with the Community Planet vision of a world that works for everyone and for the highest good of all concerned. That's why in our view of consensus, we talk about alignment versus just agreement, because we're looking to align with the highest good for all concerned.
And in contrast to that, there is a perspective that to be successful in this world, especially in the business world where I've consulted for about a decade, the idea is that in those situations, you need to assert dominance, use language that's assertive, unambiguous, confident, asserting your will, trying to influence people. There are even books out there about that. And that's very different than the cooperative intention that we are suggesting that has an openness to other points of view. I have a great example, even in business, from my experience doing that consulting. I worked for a long time in a home building business and they were always complaining about the subcontractors that they used. Instead of trying to solve the problem of the subcontractors, we suggested they get together with the subcontractors and work on making the project more effective and efficient. And it turns out that some of the ideas that came from the subcontractors themselves, like meeting with other subs to discuss cooperation and coordination, seeing the plan sooner so they can make suggestions from their experience, actually resulted in bottom line savings for the company, just using this cooperative, collaborative approach. And part of my role was to train the groups in group problem decision making and problem solving, which were similar to the consensus decision making training that Jack and I now facilitate. One of the keys in that process that helps engender cooperation and assist in collaboration is something that we call ownership language, which is what we're going to talk about today. So, what is ownership language? Ownership language is identifying what you say is your own thoughts, feelings, perceptions, rather than putting them out as the truth. What I say is. When you don't qualify your communication as your own experience, the listener is likely to hear it as someone defining reality for them, rather than acknowledging the possibility that there is other information, there are alternative viewpoints.
For us, an important factor is what is your intention in the communication? If it's to create cooperation for engagement, the desire to know and understand others while sharing oneself authentically, then ownership language can create the space for others to engage. Qualities of openness and creating and maintaining safety in our communications can also engender this cooperation.
Yeah, and we've learned a lot just from our own experience communicating with each other in the organization, because nobody's perfect. It's just like, I like the fact that you used intention, Jack, because, again, it's not like we're all going to be perfect all the time or we're going to judge other people when they don't do it right. That's not the idea. The idea is that we're trying to own our viewpoint. And we've talked about intention in this show before on a couple of different episodes, and it's a very potent process. So, Jack, why don't we go through some examples of ways to take ownership in statements by starting with certain phrases that we've come up with as examples. And for those of you listening, I would just suggest that you just notice how you experience these statements as you hear them. So one would be, I'm aware that, or
this is the way I see it.
Or the research I've done suggests.
This is a guess, and it may be wrong.
I feel, or the way I feel about this is, or the way I think about this is.
My opinion is, and this may not be true.
What I'm suggesting is. As you hear these, if you feel yourself resisting this kind of tentative language, it may be that you're just used to communication geared to being right and convincing the other, rather than jointly exploring a topic. So we're just going to do a little interaction to demonstrate using this kind of ownership language, and then using greater ownership language. Again, never being perfect. Jack, can you think of something you can say that would be non-ownership?
Okay, non-ownership here. It's obvious you don't care enough about me to even return my phone calls.
Okay, so for me, when I hear that, I start thinking of the ways I do care, all the times I have returned a call. And then I'm aware there's an assumption that Jack is attributing something to my behavior that isn't even true. I often start wanting to disapprove of the statement rather than take in the feedback. I might even want to respond with a similar kind of criticism of what Jack does. And now we're at odds with each other rather than finding a way to work out our interaction. So maybe, Jack, you can help us look at a way of communicating the same.
With more ownership, I could say, when you sometimes don't return a call, I'd start feeling like you don't care about me or our friendship.
So notice he's owning his feelings and talking about his own experience. Okay, so we're going to look at, there's many different kinds of non-ownership language that it's helpful to be aware of in order to serve to reduce a non-cooperative interchange. The first one is generalizing. Often when we communicate, we talk in terms of absolutes like always and never types of statement. When a person uses all, always, never, the other person automatically, I think, looks for, again, I think, looks for exceptions rather than receiving the main point of the communication. So let's just go through some examples of that.
Yeah, because that's one thing I do is I'm always looking for the exception. I'm an options person, and if somebody says something absolute, I'm looking for the exception. So you always interrupt me when I'm talking.
Instead, I could say something like, okay, when we're discussing something, Jack, my experience is that you interject your ideas before I've finished my communication. Do you share that perception? Or another example might be,
Another example might be I'm saying to you, you are never on time.
one could couch it with a little more ownership. I experience you often being late. Again, not always, because if I say that or never, then I'm going to look for all the exceptions rather than taking in your feedback. Another variation, I think, what is.
Yeah, another variation of generalizing is what we call absolutisms, using words like completely, totally, absolutely. Let's go through a few examples of that. You totally missed the point.
I get really defensive when I hear that. What you might want to say, Jack, is I'm not sure if you understood what I was trying to say. What did you understand to be my point? Okay, how about another one?
How about everyone knows computer nerds are not very sociable. They just don't like being with people.
So, how I might say that with more ownership, trying to communicate what my experience was, is my niece is a whiz at the computer. She even built her own. And she often chooses to spend time programming rather than being together with friends or with me. Now, another kind of non ownership language is sometimes when we want to share our experience, we say it in a way that suggests that we can speak for others or for everyone. Let's look at some examples of that.
Okay. We all agree she's a great singer. Her voice is the best.
Okay, well, if I hear that and that's not been my experience, if it is my experience, I might say yes. But if it's not my experience, I'm going to, like again, we're kind of at odds. We might get into discussion of how she is or isn't. But I could just say, I really love listening to that singer. I think her voice is just magnificent. Do you agree? How about another example?
Um, Another example of an absolutism. We are all grateful for his talk. His ideas are always so inspiring.
Okay, if I'm going to use ownership language, instead of trying to speak for everyone, I might say, I'm so glad I heard his talk. I was very inspired by it. And notice I even to say it was inspiring as opposed to I was very inspiring. I'm taking it into my perspective there because I don't know everybody experiences it that way. Okay. Now they might say if they disagree, they might if I say it that way, they might say, how were you inspired or what did you find inspiring? And now we have a dialogue rather than just trying to reclaim our points of view. And cooperative communication is also relevant to how we talk to ourselves. We can either come to ourselves with a cooperative approach, or we can say things in a way that can lead to less cooperation or even putting ourselves down. You probably have a good example, Jack. What would it be?
Self judgments can be weigh heavily upon ourselves. I completely screwed up.
Instead, I could say to myself, I don't think I handled that situation as well as I could have. And now I know better about how I could do it next time. Again, not a judgment, just an awareness, even an evaluation, but not an againstness towards myself, setting up separation. Okay. Another form of non cooperative communication might be what?
Another form in terms of this, the subject of cooperative communication is sharing our source of information is part of ownership language. It's important to identify our source of information. Often we tend to say something like, this is the way it is, when we may not have evidence that that is true. If we do have evidence, it's important to tell the listener where information is coming from so that they can evaluate for themselves the validity of the source.
Yeah, if I say my Aunt Sally said, as opposed to I read a research study, that makes a difference, right? And in cooperative communication, we're looking to include all points of view, but that doesn't mean that every point of view necessarily has the same validity. And so having to evaluate and even do more research in an interaction, if we're making a decision, might be necessary so that we can inform the discussion with more solid evidence. Ownership language, though, and how we communicate the source can help us determine what information is more trustworthy. So we're going to go through some examples now of non-ownership language, the way we might start a communication that doesn't at all indicate the source and kind of claims the truth or the reality of what exists. So what would those look like?
I think we've heard these kinds of statements a lot from other people and on the news, and where people say things like, the truth is, or the fact is, or that's exactly right, or trust me, or I know that, whatever it is.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So notice how you feel or think when you hear these kinds of phrases.
Well, I like that one where people will share and then the host or somebody says, that's exactly right, as if they're the judge and jury that knows everything and the person either hit the mark or didn't hit the mark, rather than accept the communication for what it is and what the person may or may not know. Ways that we could communicate that would have more ownership would be things like, the information I have been taught on this subject is, or my experience is, or that is what I've been told, but it isn't necessarily my experience, or I read this in, and citing the source, and experts suggested that there is research indicating, or I've seen an analysis based on the history of the region that made sense to me. So again, we're qualifying where the information came from, not claiming it as absolute, but inviting the other person to explore those sources compared to other viewpoints which may differ.
And when I hear it expressed that way, I'm not setting up the kind of resistance inside me to listening to what you have to say, because you didn't put it out as an absolute. You put it out as kind of an invitation about, this is your experience, and I'm free to have my own experience.
And I can take your point of view because I'm not resisting it. I'm trying it on. And then you might have a better source than anything I've seen. And I might get interested in, okay, where can I find more about that? And going on to another kind of communication that doesn't engender cooperations, often we speak both to ourselves and others with a kind of authoritarianism or directives. And these kind of communications can also set up resistance within self or others rather than cooperations. Like we probably are used to these just by growing up with teachers and family members. But let's just look at some examples and other more cooperative ways of talking.
People should not litter.
So that idea is worthwhile, but I might say I'd like it if people didn't throw things on the ground and help preserve the beauty of our city. Again, I'm owning the perspective I'm not telling others what they should do, which could easily set up resistance. Okay, what else?
I used to say shoulds a lot, and the person I was in a then relationship with would ask me, "Are you the keeper of the shits?"
Or people say, don't shit on yourself or others. Like that one too, as a reminder. What's an example of when we might use that kind of directive towards our, which is kind of like a judgment almost, but it's authoritarian towards
I'd
ourselves?
say I should exercise more, or I should eat better.
Okay. Now, that may work for some people, but for me, that would be just like I might be discouraged from the start, or I might just feel, intimidated about it. If I want cooperation inside of myself, I might tell myself my intention is to support my health by walking more often, or my intention is to be healthier by eating good food, and I'll take the time to buy organic or go to the farmer's market. So again, we're giving a direction, but in a way that's inviting cooperation and setting what our intention is. Again, very powerful, rather than coming down with a directive. This next, okay, so I think there's
This,
another one that's your favorite, Jack.
this next form of communication, non-cooperative communication, is one of my favorites. We call it forfeiting agency, which is giving power or control to someone or something outside of ourselves. Doing so diminishes our own empowerment by our playing victim to that something outside of us is creating our experience.
And this reminds me of a quote that I've used before in this show, which is from Viktor Frankl, who's a Holocaust survivor. So one might argue that, okay, he could actually claim victimhood, but he doesn't. He says, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies growth and our freedom. And again, that's a concept that's kind of run through the Soul Musings shows, but it's very appropriate here because language can suggest things to our consciousness and reflect our consciousness. We're looking to be more empowered and have more choice. So, how about an example?
So here's me playing victim. You never take out the garbage or the other chores you've agreed to do, and I end up having to do them. You make me so angry.
Yeah, well, I'm going to rebel against that if you talk to me that way. Maybe you could try something like, or I could try something like this if I'm giving you feedback. When you don't do the chores you agree to, I find myself getting angry. I often just do them myself because it feels easier than confronting you or reminding you. And I feel more anger because I'm now doing things I didn't agree to. So the point here too is I can express my feelings if I'm doing it as my feelings, but I'm not deciding that the other person controls me, making me feel something. And again, like the Viktor Frankl quote, we have a choice. So I can own my feelings, but not attribute them to the other person. Let's try another example here.
Here's a choice I've experienced several times lately. Customer service people who can't do their job are so aggravating and frustrating that they make me want to stop doing business with that company.
Well, I can relate. I think there's a better way of saying that if I was to take more ownership than giving my power away to that customer service person who I don't even like at this point, and I'm giving them power. When I'm dealing with a customer service rep who sounds to me like they're only repeating and defending company policy instead of trying to find a solution, I start thinking of not doing business with that company based on how frustrated and aggravated I feel. So the last thing we're going to go through as an kind of block to cooperative communication is how we give feedback, and we've kind of touched on that in some of the others, but let's just go through one more example. Jack, how would you say this without ownership?
Well, without ownership on about that, I'd say something to you like conversations with you are so difficult because most of the time You don't make eye contact.
Okay, no ownership of the feelings there, totally putting it on me. However, I could say, okay, you pointed the finger, I get it. I could say I sometimes find it difficult to talk to you when you don't look at me or make eye contact. I end up feeling like you're not listening or that you're thinking about something else. And I'd like to know what really is going on with you when that happens, because it gets in the way of our communicating well. Okay, so we're going to be wrapping up this show. There's one other thing I want to bring up. Someone had written in after listening to the consensus show and the one we did on consensus and communication with Pat. And they said, what about inner consensus? Do we have to have inner consensus before we can go on to have outer consensus? In my experience, it's a great parallel to actually look at the inner versus outer consensus. My experience is that the outer consensus skills can actually help us with our inner consensus, and we can go into that even more at another time. So this is going to wrap up the show for today. Remember that we'd love to hear from you. Please email us if you have any questions or comments. Tell us if you have used any of the skills we've been presenting in this or other episodes and how they're working for you. Remember, you can visit my website, soulmusings.org, to set up a free 15-minute consult or book an appointment, join my mailing list. And Jack, we have another free offering, I think, from Community Planet.
Yeah, also, because you're listening, if you're interested in how to create a world that works for everyone, my book, which you see in the background here, The Next Evolution, a Blueprint for Transforming the Planet. If you go to the website communityplanet.org and email us there why you'd like to receive this, we'll send you a free ebook of The Next Evolution.
Okay, and you can also see blogs and more about our consensus training on communityplanet.org. So just as a closing, please take in a deep breath as we do this intercessory prayer. Put your hand on your heart, center in that divine essence of who you are. Feel the love and peace of that. And now just send that energy to God, Spirit, the universe as your gift to be used for the highest good of all concerned in this world and any part of God's creation for more peace, harmony, and love. We look forward to seeing you next time. Hope you enjoy today's show, and God bless you. You have been listening to Soul Musings, exploring and embracing higher perspectives with me, Dr. Connie. Tune in every second Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific to learn how to use every experience for spiritual expansion and how to create the essence of the experience you want instead of the form. Learn about ways of living and working together that help build a more loving and cooperative world. Visit soulmusings.org to see more about what I offer and to book a 15-minute free consult.